Welcome back to another episode of the Casey Campbell Podcast. Casey Campbell with you, of course, and we are pleased to be joined by the one, the only, the almighty Bob Pockrass from Fox Sports is here. How's it going, Bob?
Great, Casey. Getting ready for a season to start. It's going to be here before we know it.
It will be just a few weeks away from the season starting, and there's already so many storylines of this offseason and all that. Let's start with this next-gen car. I know you were at the test this week, and the question is about the supply of the cars. With everything with the supply chain shortage, with everything we've heard about that, how big of a concern is it with NASCAR teams that you've talked to?
I mean, it's a concern. Richard Childress has two cars. He unveiled a paint scheme yet at the test, and that was his car for the Clash. So yeah, there's concern, just like there was concern in 2013 on whether they would have enough deck lids to race with. So it's not something that's unique when you bring out a new car. I just think the teams wish that they were a little bit further along than they are. And of course, the most difficult for them to handle is the fact that most of the parts and pieces come from vendors. So it's not like the teams are just waiting on stuff for them to, it's not like they're just waiting on materials for them to then go fabricate or create a part or a piece. I mean, they have to wait for the vendors to have the completed product to ship to them.
Yeah. Is there a possibility that teams could run out of cars if we see crashes like we could see in the 500?
I mean, it's a possibility. You look at what Austin Dillon was able to do at the test in December. His team, he crashed pretty hard. Like, that was a hard crash. And they had that car repaired in 7 or 8 hours. And I asked the team, I said, if you were at the racetrack, could you do this overnight? And they said yes. So, I think that tells me that as long as, there's some spare parts and pieces at the racetrack, in NASCAR, I think it's going to allow teams to have access to some of those potentially, that there will be the ability that if you wreck on Saturday, that you are not going to need a backup car. If you wreck in the practice or qualifying, that you could repair that car to go race the next day.
Let's talk about, the next gen car overall. Have the concerns about the car from drivers, fans, have they kind of gone away now with the horsepower announcement or what they saw this week at Daytona? Is there still concerns about this next gen car?
Well, Casey, I think there were still concerns about the Gen 6 car all the way up
That's true.
to the last race at Phoenix, right? So,
yeah.
So, I mean, a new car is a work in progress, just like any car is a work in progress. So there's always going to be a concern. But I think there's less concern now that NASCAR has settled on the 670 horsepower with the small spoiler for virtually all the races except for Daytona, Talladega, and Atlanta. So I think that at least the drivers have some confidence. They've got kind of what they wanted, and we'll see. Now, NASCAR's done some work on the heat issues, but you really don't know that until you get into the summer, right? Whether you've really solved those problems. They appear to have solved the steering rack issues. So look, I mean, there are always issues that are going to come up during the year, but I think there's a lot more confidence now than there was in November or December. And I would say this, the fear of the known is a little bit easier to handle than the fear of the unknown. So, before all the teams started testing in November, there was just a lot of questions because nobody really knew what they had. Now that they know what they have, I think they have an idea of the paths that they can take to fix any of the issues they have.
So let's talk about pit crews for a second. You know that we're going to go to the one lug nut on the Cup cars. However, Xfinity and trucks are going to still be the 5 lug nuts. Do you still see crews going over and pitting Xfinity and truck cars with 5 and then pitting Cup cars with 1? Because I know there was talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a mix. I think there's some crew guys who just want to focus on 1 as far as focusing on the Cup, and they don't want to be going back and forth. I think money talks, right? If you get a little bit of extra money to do a truck or Xfinity, and that's important to you, then I think you'll still do it. Look, you have drivers who go from Xfinity to Cup, and it takes a different set of skills. Those cars race very differently, right? So if a driver can do it, I don't see why a crew guy can't master two different tasks. I don't think it's that, especially one test that they've been doing for a long, long time. So I think it's going to be a mix. I think it'll be less important to have a Cup crew. It may be less important for like Hendrick to say, okay, we want this Cup crew doing this JR Motorsports car, right? And we want all those guys to learn how to work together, because there are a lot of different things with going from 5 lugs to 1. But I still think you'll see plenty of crew members, especially young crew members. You know, there's probably some older crew guys who are like, yeah, I'll just do Cup on Sundays. But I still think you'll see a number who will do both.
Okay. Let's talk about, with the LA Clash coming up, there's obviously concern about what, if there could be COVID restrictions coming down from LA County. There also could be, with the proof of vaccination thing and all that. Where do we stand on that, in terms of the LA Clash with the, when fans go there, do they need to show proof of vaccination and all that, or what's the plan for that?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, just like you have to, if you go to the football stadium there, you either have to show proof of vaccination or a negative PCR test within 48 hours of entry, or a negative antigen test, rapid test from within 24 hours of entry. So that will be for everybody who goes, whether it's drivers or crew members or fans or media or anybody who enters that facility. So, now NASCAR's announced like whether they're going to have any sort of rapid testing on site. I would think they'll have to for crew members who are not vaccinated, but and drivers who are not vaccinated, and they get a PCR within 48 hours. So but that's the rule. I don't see that changing. Whether there's any additional protocols, we'll see. But with the Super Bowl in LA the following week, I'm pretty sure, I'm pretty confident that it will happen. In LA, I don't see it. That there being any restrictions, because look, any restrictions they would potentially do for the Coliseum, then you would potentially think they would have to do for the Super Bowl a week later, and I just don't see that happening.
Right. If a driver tests positive or a crew member tests positive, obviously they got to go out and quarantine and all that. Has NASCAR changed their policy on how long you have to be, how long you are supposed to be in quarantine for? Because we saw the NFL and the NBA and the NHL do it. Have you heard anything from NASCAR with that changing?
I mean, I think it will change, but NASCAR hasn't said what the exact changes will be. NASCAR typically has been following the CDC guidelines, which have changed. But NASCAR hasn't issued it to the teams. I don't think there's any reason that they would issue it until probably a week before the Clash, right? That's, because things can change. You're not going to kind of set that policy 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time.
Right. In terms of, I know that, heading into the Daytona 500, I know the question is, how many fans will be allowed in the infield? Where do we stand on that? Because I know last year they kind of pulled back on some of that, and then where do we stand on fans and top passes and all that?
Well, I mean, I think the president of Daytona told us the other day that the restrictions will be the same as they were in August, that if you're indoors, like in a suite or something, you have to wear a mask. But beyond that, that pretty much was the only restrictions. I don't see any sort of other restrictions, except for maybe like on what would be considered like a garage pass or a VIP pass, how many people they actually let in the garage area, which which they were limiting all the way till the end of last year. I think potentially could be similar. But again, the Daytona is 5 weeks away from this week, right? So and I think everybody knows that Omicron takes a pretty the spike is quick, but potentially it also drops quickly, right? As far as the number of people infected. So really, I think for NASCAR's concern is that, one, they'll always try to protect the drivers And so potentially could that mean a limit on appearances, on a limit of the times they get out of the garage? Potentially, yes. As far as competition goes and everything like that, really the only thing that could keep NASCAR from that would probably force NASCAR's hand as far as competition goes, I would think would be if the hospitals in a certain area are full. And you wouldn't know that till the days leading into the event. But the only thing that and obviously NASCAR monitored it all last year, and I would expect them to monitor it this year, is just make sure that if they did have something happen at the track where several people or drivers need to be hospitalized, that there isn't going to be an issue of being able to be admitted to the hospital, right? I think that to me would be the biggest thing that they have to, or the biggest thing that they will be monitoring.
Where are we at in NASCAR banning political sponsors, Bob?
Well, they talked about it. We haven't seen a memo as of when we're talking, but I think NASCAR is going through that process to try to figure out how to word it. What is, and I think the biggest question is, what is a political sponsor? We wrote about this on Fox Sports website a few weeks ago. How far, there's so many things that can be considered political. So, is it just you can't have campaigns? And but again, even that, as I wrote, is the Sierra Club, an environmental group, considered political?
Right.
Is PETA considered political?
Right.
Eddie Gossage, would say, some people might argue he went, but like is Duck Commander political? If you have companies are companies that have that are known to have people who are outspoken on their political views, are they considered political? So I just think where is NASCAR going to draw the line, and how they are going to define it is going to be pretty interesting to see.
I know you asked in Zoom calls yesterday that I was also on some of the team owners talk about HEP-based sponsors. Of course, Tyler Reddick's sponsor 3 Chi, I think I'm saying that right, on Tyler Reddick's car. Where are we at in terms of that? Do you think we could see more of those type of sponsors in NASCAR?
Maybe. I think the difficulty is how much are laws and policies going to change from the federal government and state governments. And that's the thing, like, because if this sponsorship that they have, NASCAR will approve a company if their products are don't violate what's called the Farm Bill, the 2018 Farm Bill. But the interpretation of that law and the potential changes to policies and or that law itself are issues that are talked about every day. And if those changes come in in 3 months or a year or 5 years, if that changes, that could potentially change the ability to have a sponsor. So, I think a lot of teams are looking at it and saying, well, what type of products will pass what NASCAR approves today, and is there any danger of those products not being approved in the future? Because NASCAR could at any time say, if the laws change, or if the way they are interpreted change, then the NASCAR's approval will change, and it's not like anybody's grandfathered in.
Right. When you look at the LA Clash and how that was put together, really, what is NASCAR feeling as they're going into this event? What's been the vibe around the sport from different fans, drivers, teams? What's everyone feeling about?
Well, drivers feel like that they're going to have to bump each other out of the way to pass. And you say, well, man, that might make their owners a little bit worried, but the owners are like, man, my sponsors are interested in it. And we've had other sponsors who have been interested in it. And there's a lot of chatter about it. And this clash will probably be one of the best watched clashes in a long, long time. Now, does that mean it's going to be a great race? Well, we don't know that. But we know it's going to kind of be a must-see event. And I think everybody is curious. And I think everybody wants to see if it'll work, because if it does work, does that mean you can do this at other venues here in the United States, or even in other countries, right? Would it be easier if NASCAR wanted to have a race in England to do it inside a big stadium like that, and show them like, hey, look, we just did this here in LA, where the Super Bowl and the Olympics are city, and so we can do it in your venue and do it right. So I think that this is, people will be like, oh, if it doesn't work, then why'd they even do it? They're doing it to see, they're not doing it just for the Clash, right? They're doing it to see if it'll work for potentially big events beyond the Clash this year.
Right. And we'll be excited to see it. Of course, you'll be out there. Of course, big, also Fox is going to be broadcasting it, and wall-to-wall coverage. Of course, it's going to be exciting down there. But anyway, Bob, thank you so much for coming on and sharing a portion of your time with us. And we'll have you on. We'll have you on next time, and we'll talk more about whatever's going on in NASCAR.
All right, Casey, I've enjoyed it.